Hi everyone, I hope you are all enjoying the long weekend. I have definitely enjoyed getting the opportunity to get to know some of you through our introductory discussion board this week. So thank you for your careful attention to that. Also, thank you guys for emailing me quickly with any questions that you had. Hopefully, you're starting to kind of get the swing of things in terms of how the class is organized. The good news is that every week, or at least every learning module should look pretty similar. So if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, I promise as this semester goes on, it really will become second nature. So real quick before I introduce what we will be looking into this week, I wanted to review some things from last week. First off, as usual for this class, we have a very diverse group, which is what I love. I really enjoy the online platform because it allows us to bring multiple different students together. While I wish we could meet face to face every week, I do like how online platforms seem to kind of open up the opportunity for several of you. One thing I wanted to note is several of you mentioned being identified as a gifted student in your personal K-12 experiences, which is so important to keep in mind. So all of us has our own experience with gifted education, whether that means we were identified as gifted or whether it means we maybe missed that identification point by very little in terms of standardized testing, which we'll talk about. Or maybe you had a brother or a sister, a friend, or you really wanted to be in gifted and talented, but you weren't. Or perhaps you felt like you should and you weren't. No matter what your experience as children growing up in the States, you probably had some kind of interaction with gifted and talented. And I want you to keep those interactions in mind because those form a lot of assumptions that we have in terms of what it means to be gifted and talented. Several of you actually mentioned I was in a gifted program, but I didn't really know why, or I didn't really know what it meant. So I think it's important that you keep that in mind. Several students are surprised when they learn what it really means to be gifted and also some of the common characteristics that go along with that. So the big thing for me in this class is that we confront what we think giftedness is with the facts. And let me tell you guys, that is hard. This is my field. I have been studying gifted ed for several years now. I myself was identified as gifted, but not until later in my K-12 experience. So that had a great impact on me. And I will be honest, I take this myths and reality survey every single year with you all, and I know the answers, but some are still difficult for me. So I just wanted to cover a few. Majority of you were surprised about the fact that gifted students should not be placed in heterogeneous groups. So I want to dig into that for just a minute here. What that means is that gifted students should not be placed with students who are struggling in the class. So oftentimes when gifted students, when gifted students are done early, then what happens? They are placed with a student that is struggling and asked to kind of help that student catch up. So let's dig into that for a minute. Number one, students who are gifted are not just faster learners. They learn differently. They see concepts and material differently. So it is actually a disservice to ask these students who are gifted to then tutor their students or their peers that are struggling because they will not see the problem in the same way, and it's very common for them to further confuse that student. At the same time, if you ask a gifted student to repeatedly reteach something they already know, many students view that as punishment for being done early. So when we talk about gifted students, there's a difference between their intellectual peers and their same age peers. Intellectual peers are on the same level intellectually. They can challenge one another. They can encourage one another. In short, they get one another. Whereas your same age peers are your exact same age. So oftentimes you'll see a child who is gifted on the playground hanging out with the teachers because they want to have those more intellectual conversations. So one thing to notice, we still have heterogeneous grouping within gifted students. So it's important that we don't view grouping just based on ability and just based on ability in one content area. So a lot of times I'll hear people kind of counteract that myth and say, well, isn't it important that we have multiple viewpoints and different aspects of learning, different ways of learning in one group? Yes. Different strengths in one group? Yes. When we group students who are gifted together, it is a little bit more homogeneous in the sense of their ability, but it's still heterogeneous in the sense of, okay, one is interested in one particular topic more than the other. It's still heterogeneous in the sense of some are going to view problems differently. So it's important that we don't assume that just because you are labeled gifted, all of these gifted students are the same. So that is one that we have to very consistently kind of check ourselves with. Another is acceleration. It's very simple to think that if we, for example, let a child skip a grade, it will impact them socially. Actually, oftentimes the opposite is true because, again, intellectual peers. Students need that interaction with peers that get them intellectually, and if we don't allow them to skip, that means they may not have those intellectual peers. Now, of course, we want to provide social environments for students to be with others of all ages, but it is important to note that challenging students is a way of serving them socially. If you've worked with any kind of gifted program, particularly the first that comes to my mind are the EDUC TIP programs. They do a lot of like weekend academic adventures, academic camps during the summer, and gifted kids love to be with gifted kids because they finally feel understood, they finally feel like everyone gets them, and that's really important to them. So it is important to remember that. Lastly, a couple others that I saw, you were surprised that students who are gifted may be difficult to parent. Giftedness does not mean perfect behavior. In fact, it often means the opposite. And gifted students are highly resilient. They have a lot of reasoning skills, and they think they know what's best. So we'll definitely counteract that one when we study characteristics of gifted next week. So keep those myths and realities in mind. Next week, we will revisit that survey when you do your myths and realities reflection assignment. But for this week, what I want us to focus on is your first discussion board. So in terms of each learning module, we typically start out with a discussion board based on a case study. So one thing up front, all of these case studies are built on real stories. Some of them in the case studies I experienced, some of them are my colleagues, but just know that they're very real world studies. So in the sense of how to handle this, usually I ask my students to read the case study first. So the case study this week is about a teacher who is basically fighting to keep some kind of acceleration, some kind of gifted service in his school. So there is a situation going on in which AP classes are being offered, and the principal and some others are threatening to have to take them away. And it's up to the teacher to really stand up for the fact that these classes are needed. So what I would suggest is you read the case study first, read the question that goes along with the case study, and keep that in mind, and then dig into your library resources. So every library that I have created for you all has various different sources. There are articles, there are videos, there are handouts, there are a few PowerPoint presentations. So I do that very purposely because I want you to have multiple ways to explore this material. Now, up front, guys, it gets repetitive, and I do that on purpose. Why? Because I'm giving you multiple representations of the material. So I want you to choose the way that you learn best, okay? If you feel that you learn best by reading professional peer researched or peer reviewed rather articles, I want you to start with that. So look at the articles and really dig into them, and then say, all right, what else might help me? Maybe videos. Then view the videos as a supplement to the articles. Perhaps after that, you are looking for a little bit more information about some material that you may have found confusing. So then look into the lectures or look into the handouts. So it's important that you kind of work through in a way that is helpful for you. You are held accountable to all of the material through our discussion board posts. There is not going to be one big test that asks you to define giftedness based on this one article. Okay, so when we take a graduate class, it's really about synthesizing all of the information. So I do want you to focus on that. You do need to review all of the library materials, but please don't stress yourself out in the sense that you have to know every single thing. View the material as supporting each other and helping you really understand everything in that library. So begin with the case study, then read the library materials. I definitely suggest you take some notes, look at the handouts. Typically, I have students tell me if they're struggling with certain content, they will print out some of the handouts. This is a class that I try to make very practical. So print things out, keep them with you as you enter the teaching field or as you continue with your teaching. And then I want you to start crafting your discussion board post. So just like we discussed last week, initial discussion board posts are always due by Fridays, and your responses are always due by Sunday. To earn full points, you need to respond to at least 2 of your classmates' posts. You will notice in our learning module that right where it says discussion board post, I have linked our rubric as well as some sample discussion posts. So this is not an opportunity for you to simply say what you think. The key to these discussion board posts is that they are informed by the research that I give you in the learning modules. In the library materials. So just real quickly, I wanted to review that rubric with you all. So for each different post, you have up to 10 points to earn. The first 3 points come from referencing the case content. And what I mean by that is I want you to really answer these discussion board posts related to the case study. So for example, this first case study asks you, how should Mr. Taylor, you'll read about him, explain that gifted education is necessary to his principal? Why gifted education is important and how that is going to convince the principal to keep these AP classes. So in your post, you need to be referring to that specific situation. Don't just say, gifted education is important for these 3 reasons. Here's my little paragraph about it. The challenge is to really say, if I were Mr. Taylor, I would tell the principal these 3 reasons, and I would support keeping these AP classes because. You see the difference? So I'm referring to the case study. I'm putting myself in the situation. I'm not just summarizing the topic. So those are your first 3 points. You then have 3 points that you can earn from your library materials. This is very important, again, that you are quoting from your library materials, and that means that you need to be citing them. I do require APA citation, and there's information about that in your discussion board post folder. But basically what I want you to do is say, according to this author, gifted education is defined as, or gifted education is important because, as proven by this author. Basically, what that does is giving you practice citing why things are important in the literature. Okay, so this is not your personal opinion, this is what the literature says. If you don't have experience with APA, please do not stress. This is an introduction in terms of APA styling. The purpose of this class is not APA citations. The purpose of this class is gifted education and understanding what that is. So please do not spend your time memorizing APA style. The most important thing for me is that you are referencing where you got your information, which should always be done with the author's last name and the date of publication. If you do end up quoting an entire direct quote, as in you're copying and pasting a quote, that's fine, but you need to give me the page number of that quote to make sure you are appropriately referencing. So 3 points from case content, 3 points from library materials, 2 points for your articulation, meaning this really is where I hold you most accountable for the information. So I want you to put together a well thought out post. I can tell if it's something you kind of throw together at the end, so let's avoid that. And also 2 points for your responses. These responses need to be thoughtful, so something like I agree is not enough. And I've also included some sample responses in this discussion board information. So again, just to clarify, this week we are digging into our first case study and discussion board based on that case study. By Friday, I would like for you to post your initial post to that discussion board, and by Sunday evening, you need to post your responses. This is an important module, guys. What we are doing is digging into what is the definition of giftedness? What actually is gifted and talented education? You will notice it depends on who you ask. I could be identified as gifted in one state and not the other, okay? So it's important that we really dig into this material. As always, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. I apologize, this video is a little long. Typically at the beginning of the semester, I want to be as explicit as possible in terms of logistics and how things work. Excuse me. So trying to forecast any questions that I may have. But of course, feel free to contact me and I can respond to individual questions. Again, I hope you have a wonderful long weekend. Let's not forget why we have a long weekend. This is not just a day off. Martin Luther King did so much for our country, sparked so much in terms of equality in our education system, and this is something that is not over, guys. We have got to continually advocate for all students, particularly in gifted education. We will study issues of underrepresentation later this semester. So let's remember why we have a day off, and I hope that you guys have a wonderful week, and I look forward to hearing from you soon.